if you've got the CEO so closely tied to the culture that's been built, it's hard to pull that all apart because likely the leadership team is all like it's all kind of intertwined there. So, but it has to start with one person. One person has to change the mindset, and I think if we're going to do that, it's got to be the CEO, and then everybody else needs to.
Welcome to Adapt or Die Transformative Leadership Conversations. This is the show where I meet top executives, CEOs, founders, entrepreneurs, and we talk about those moments where they were forced to pivot or to perish. I'm Andreas Pettersson. I'm a former tech CEO that turned into an executive coach, and I'm also founder of Leaders Adapt. Welcome to the show, Annette.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I know that there's a lot of things that companies struggle with. I know what I struggled with when I reached out to you and what we were trying to do. Some companies, it's the bad strategy, it's a bad plan, it's bad employees, bad culture. What is the most common thing that you see, and where do you even get started about helping them with their problems?
It's a great question. And it's no lie. It all starts at the top, right? So when I start working with clients, I interview the leadership team, a sampling of employees, and a sampling of customers. And it always comes down to what the leadership team is doing and how, and what the culture is like. You know, what have they deliberately built, or what are they allowing, right? And so that's always where it's going to, there's a saying about, the bottleneck is at the top of the bottle, right? And that's that's so true for business too. It is at the top of the organization. And so, there's a lot of things that end up happening where the leadership, and I'm going to just talk about the CEO specifically, thinks that, the problem is X when the problem is A through Z, right? I've had CEOs who are like, oh, our problem is just communication, or our problem is this, or our problem is that. It's not. It's so much more than that.
I know the feeling, and I think we reached out to you. I wanted to implement customer experience into the organization. We didn't know where to start, and we realized, like, hey, the guru actually lives literally 20 minutes from the office here in the US. So that was interesting. I have to admit, I read your book, and I do remember the first book. I remember the last chapter, which was Dear CEO, but what our main problem was actually we needed customer experience, but we need to change our culture and how we viewed and how we listened to the customer. Is that the most common thing, or what is the most common thing that actually is the problem for people who start implementing customer experience?
It really is. It is the culture. And it's so funny because, like you said, I've been doing this for 30 plus years, and you said I'm a pioneer, but I'm just going to say I'm a pioneer because I started when I was 4.
Good one.
But that's exactly what it is. Well, like in all my years of working with companies, we keep having these conversations about, oh, we've got to have leadership commitment. Leaders got to be bought in. Leaders got to have skin in the game. They've really got to be out there talking the talk and walking the walk. And so that's exactly what I've learned over the years and have incorporated into my books. And I had somebody, after I wrote the second one, Built to Win, somebody said, oh, you've shifted to talking about culture and leadership. And I was like, no, not really. I've always talked about that. I've always, in my work, have always gone straight to the top and said, this is where it's going to happen. It's either going to happen here or it's going to break here. And so to try to explain that to people, that's where you have to start. You have to start with the culture. The culture is the foundation for everything you do. And the leaders, or the CEO, is really the one who sets that culture to begin with. And then as we do the work, we get this grassroots groundswell where we get employees, engaging and adapting and rolling out that culture throughout the entire organization. But it really does start with the leaders. And it's funny how, I think that's the one thing, or one of the things that has really limited how the customer experience work has evolved or hasn't evolved, because people are trying to do like these tactical things, trying to fix the experience at the surface where the customer is touching the brand. But it goes so much deeper than that, right? It really does go into the culture, which is the precursor for a great or employee experience, which is the precursor for a great customer experience too. There's a lot there to unpack, trust me, but it does start, it does start there. And so when I wrote Built to Win, that's the book that's specifically about culture. It's it really is, leaders got to be committed. They've got to be aligned, and they've got to focus on it, deliberately designing that culture. Otherwise, any work that you're going to do for either employee experience or customer experience is going to fall by the wayside.
I couldn't agree more. And your internal culture becomes your external culture. And that's the biggest problem. When you come in and you start working with these companies, is the leadership team aligned? Or do you normally start by aligning them? Or like, who is the main person reaching out to? Is it the CEO? Is it the chief revenue officer? Or who is your main point of contact usually?
Yeah, a lot of good questions there. It's oftentimes a chief customer officer, a brand new chief customer officer. It's the CRO, it's the head of marketing, it's the head of sales. A lot of times it's sort of in that CRO, head of sales. There was at one point over a course of like 3 years, I had three, I'll just call them CROs for simplicity, but four CROs reaching out to me to say, hey, help me. And it's just this realization that, our customer retention is down. We're losing business. What's happening here, And so a lot of times those are the folks that reach out to me. Sometimes it's a CEO, so that's a good thing too. But I think the first thing that I ask is, what problem are you trying to solve? And that problem typically it's retention, whether it's on the employee side or the customer side, or something is happening there where business is down or it's trending downward, that they want to figure out why and what's going on. So that's the level of people that I want to work with too, because if you come in with a manager or director, they don't have the I don't want to say the authority, but they don't have the authority to make a lot of decisions unless they have great influence to push it to the top. We're not going to get very far. We're just going to be talking and spinning our wheels. So,
do you demand to meet the whole executive, the whole C-suite, and have the conversation with the CEO, or would you walk away if you just have to have? No, I am one single point of contact. You can only talk to me.
Yeah, that's not a good way to start this, because like I said, and when I start working with when I started working with you, and when I start working with other companies too, I want to talk to the entire leadership team. And typically, to answer your other question, they are not aligned. There's always somebody, at least one person, sometimes two, sometimes more, that just aren't on board with what needs to be done. Or it's not even so black and white that they're on board or not on board with culture change or, focusing on the customer or something. They're just a different breed of leader that is so different from the rest of the leadership team that it's like, wow, how do they ever get anything done? They're very, very different and think very differently about things. And so I've worked with several organizations where that is exactly what we need to do first, is get that cleaned up, or else we're definitely not going anywhere after that, because there's so out of alignment.
Very provocative question now. So looking back at all the companies you have worked with, the person the cleanup you have to do, how often are they able to adapt or change with the change of the company, and how often do they have to go? What's sort of the gut feel?
In terms of get the alignment and getting that person out, or just in general?
Do they get on board, or do they get out?
Yes. Okay. So let's see if I have a good percentage there of how many get on board and how many don't. I would say the bigger chunk is they get out. Mm-hmm. And they're just not going to align. I mean, I've worked with companies where there are 15 executives and 5 of them had to go. Or there's 4 and 2 of them have to go, or there's, I'm working with some clients right now where the executive team is 7 people and 2 of them really need to go. And they're working through it, but, and it's up to the CEO to see if he can, make that happen, but they just can't seem to get on board. And he's committed to, if they're not going to get on board, then we'll just, part ways. And once that happens, it's almost like you've either infused fresh air into the system, or you've let like bad air out, however you want to say it, and it's just a completely different vibe and a completely different way of working with them, because all of a sudden that pain, that frustration, that thing that keeps holding them back is gone. And I think that's a really hard decision or thing for people to see, right? What do you mean my leadership team isn't aligned? What do you mean we're not on that? What do you mean I have to get rid of somebody? But more often than not, I think the CEO knows, they just don't want to deal with it. And I know those are painful conversations. That's a painful thing, right? But they just don't want to deal with it. And so they just let it ride. And all it does is it infuses more, for lack of a better way of putting it, more garbage into the organization. It just infuses more bad blood into the organization, right? And it's harder to get that transformation rolling.
I just want to build upon what you're saying here. Not only is it super important to realize that this is a high risk, high value effort, but the synergies, not only are you getting customer experience in, those people who were resisting you and the culture and working against it previously, once they're gone, you're going to get so many other synergy effects throughout the organization through the work you do. But tell me, Annette, so let's pretend that like you're in these meetings, right? And these are tough conversations. Tell me about, like, paint a picture for me how these conversations typically go about. Tell me who is in the room. How do you go about convincing them that this is the path to go? And what are sort of that moment where everyone was like, okay, unless we do, we have to change here. We have to make the hard decision.
Yeah.
How do you get them to that point?
Yeah. And let me go before I answer that, let me go back to your point about the synergies and what happens when you let that bad air out of there is this level of relief that employees feel. I mean, what's the saying about all boats? Yeah, it's there is just this sense of relief and this sense of, oh, I don't have to walk on eggshells. I don't have to do this or not do that, or, those kinds of things. So it immediately brings up the employees and their experience and what they're feeling and their level of engagement, which then translates to productivity and blah, 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 all these other things that lead to great outcomes for customers and for the business. So yeah, absolutely. Who's in the room? Typically those conversations are, it's CEO is like the main person, right? I've had the conversation with CEO and CFO. I've had the conversation with CEO and the CRO who has come to me. And that has happened a couple of times. I mean, it's happened pretty much in every organization that I've worked with. Where it's going to be either the CEO or it's going to be the person who came to me plus the CEO. So it's typically that. The path is a little bit different in terms of how they go about it. I typically leave that to the CEO to have that conversation. First of all, going back to my point about it's a hard conversation, right? So they don't all want to do it, and they don't all want to do it immediately. Well, let's wait and see. Let's see how things are. Oh, really? Are you sure? I've had a whole host of different conversations, right? So I leave it up to him, and they've all been men. I'll leave it up to him to make that decision about how that conversation is going to happen and when it's going to happen. But for the most part, it's all been within a pretty decent amount of time. The one company took I worked with them for about 2.5 years, and I think it took them about 1.5 years before they cleared out like the 5 executives that needed to go, right? And so it just depends on the person, but I'm there to just remind them.
And for someone who have worked with you, I will say this for maybe it's your European heritage, but many people here in US, they need someone like you who is very direct, no emotion, just logic, objective. This is what it is. This is what needs to happen. Here are the consequences if you don't. I really appreciated that part. So part of it is not only the message you bring in it, but how you do it. That impressed me from day one.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I will say that from my early days in doing this work, I just remember going in and talking to executives where they would say, I don't need a yes person. Just tell me what I need to know. Tell me what I need to do. I get too many consultants who come in here and tell me what I want to hear. Tell me what I need to hear and tell me what I need to do. Don't tell me what I want to hear. So
I love that. Okay, so in order for people to go through this change, right? And now we're going to slip into the section of the conversation which is called adaptation here. Is it individuals that are holding on to a fixed mindset, or is it that the culture is so ingrained and it's a culture that isn't prepared for change?
It's a little bit of both, and it's hard to pull it apart sometimes, right? Because if you've got the CEO so closely tied to the culture that's been built, it's hard to pull that all apart because likely the leadership team is all like it's all kind of intertwined there. So That's a fair question, but it has to start with one person. One person has to change the mindset. And I think if we're going to do that, it's got to be the CEO, and then everybody else needs to, you know, be in line with that. Otherwise it's just not going to happen. But yeah, it's unfortunately, there's no clean answer. They're kind of tied together there.
I think it's super interesting because not only do you have the company culture, you have a fixed or adaptive mindset of the leader. And then you are the third person, the individual who comes in with your core values, your way of how to look at the situation. How do you make sure when you help this organization that you don't push too much on who you are in the context of their culture?
Yeah. I put the focus on, so culture is core values plus behavior, right? So I put
Mhm.
the focus on their core values, and I put the focus on defining what the behaviors are relative to each of those core values, and then taking them back too and saying, where did these core values come from? Why are they what they are? Or do you even have them? I've worked with several organizations that don't even, or maybe they have them, but they haven't been dusted off in years. But I've worked with that don't even have them, where we've got to start from scratch and just say, what are the core values? So that's how I do it. I put the focus on them as individuals. I put the focus on their business's core values and their core values and the legacy that they want to leave behind as a leader for the organization.
Love it. How often should you be revising your core values and your culture?
I'm a true believer in core values are what they are. They're static, right? I know a lot of people go, will your culture change? Well, it will. It will change over time. I think that if you want to make a culture change, you don't have core values that reflect what you're changing your culture to. So if you're going from a product centric to a customer centric, or a sales centric to a people centric, whatever it is, you're probably going to have to revisit them and make sure that at the very least, if you have them, that the behaviors that are aligned or that define each of those values is aligned with the culture that you're transitioning to. Otherwise, you may need to add a value or two. I worked with a client a while ago that had issues with customer trust, and they went, and it wasn't one of their core values, and they actually went and added that as a core value and went through the whole exercise of what does that mean, and what does that look like, and what behaviors does that drive for the employees. And after the 6 or 7 months that it took for them to get through defining it and operationalizing it, customers were coming back and saying, there's a whole different world of people that I'm interacting with. It's a very different experience with this organization than it was, a year ago. So I don't know that you need to do a complete overhaul, but you need to make sure you've defined your behaviors to be relative to the culture that you're trying to build, or you may need to add one to be more in line with the culture that you're trying to build.
I think defining the pattern of what is the typical person acting in this culture with the core values. What is that behavior? And defining the anti-pattern have been one of the most important tools for us. What's your thoughts when I say these things? Do you agree, or how do you sort of...
110%, yeah. Because I always say that you have to define the acceptable behaviors and the unacceptable, right? What does it look like when we're not living our core values? I think that if people don't know that, it's right from wrong, right? And so how do we, culture is often described as what people are doing when nobody's looking. Well, how will I know what to do when nobody's looking if you don't tell me what's right and what's wrong relative to this value? So yeah, absolutely, 100% agree with you.
How often is the executive team, the C-suite's behavior matched or mismatched with what they have put in the presentation of this is our culture and our core values?
Too often. Too often.
Tell me more about that.
It has to be. I mean, the culture is driven from the top. And like I said earlier, it's driven from the top. And then eventually we get this grassroots groundswell from our employees and they take over and run with it. But it is leaders. Employees watch leaders. They never take the, foot off the gas and go, oh, well, we don't care what our leaders do because that's not a big deal. I know what the culture is. They go, oh, well, he didn't do that and he did that and he, kind of thing. And so why can't I do it? So employees are always watching leaders. So leaders have to model the behavior, reinforce the things that employees are doing that to show that they're living the values, and they need to do all that themselves, and they need to do all that amongst themselves as well too. So it's foot on the gas every day, all day long, in order to keep that culture the way that they have defined it to be or designed to be.
So you're in a company, you come in and you see that they're just a mismatch between the leaderships and the actual behaviors compared to what is truly defined. How do you avoid slipping into sort of becoming a therapist or a coach or a mentor for the individual leaders when you kind of realize that, oh shit, unless they actually change the way how they operate, like there's no way I will be successful rolling out a full customer experience, EX, like all of those things. How do you go about it?
It's funny that you say that because I have this very specific client in mind. It's two brothers own the business, and I was a therapist for half the leadership team, but the one brother specifically kept asking me, "Come to my office. Let's sit and talk through this. What do I need to do? How do I do that?" It was pretty funny. It was pretty funny. He listened, but he didn't. He didn't really change his behaviors though. But it is funny because you become just that. You become the therapist. You have to listen, and like I said, don't be that yes person. Don't tell them what they want to hear. Tell them what they need to hear. Be tough and make sure that they. So yeah, all the time. To answer your question, all the time.
I love it. Okay, so one of the challenges I have seen with CX, and especially in the context of what we are talking about, that is when you have an organization that's more stable, you have a fairly stabilized culture core value. And by the way, I am a firm believer that the older the company is, the longer the employees have stayed, the harder it is to change the core values and the culture.
Great.
But then every now and then you need a new CEO. And the CEO might come in. The company might not have been set up for customer experience. The new CEO comes in. He has been a CEO before. He have had great success implementing CX, EX, all the other acronyms in the other organizations. But he also know, or she also know, that now I'm in a situation where there might be a very stable, grounded culture here.
Yeah.
Tell me what's going on in their mind and how are you helping them?
Yeah, it's the fear of change, or we've always done it this way. Why should we do it your way kind of thing. So the way that I work with those folks is it's an education for everybody, right? And again, I start with those interviews, right? Me starting with those interviews with everybody is really sort of I get to do a little bit of education too from a third party side, but then the CEO and the executive team need to start doing their education in terms of why do we have to do this? What's in it for me? What happens if we don't do this? Those kinds of things. So that's really important. But it's there's a lot of that. Well, we've always done things this way. Why do we have to do them differently? And I agree with you when it's a large corporation where employees have been there a long time, it's that much harder to do it. And I'm working with a client right now where that is the case, but the CEO has been there 2.5 years, and he's basically put his foot down, and he's done all that. He's done the education. He's done here's why we're doing it. What's in it for us if we don't do this, what, kind of thing. And has basically laid it out there and said, if you're not on the bus, then you're off the bus,
I love that you said that. I think so many CEOs, they try to baby the organization into a change. I think you can do that for a while, but you reach a point where it's diminishing return to just keep trying to influence them. And it's like the train is leaving the station. You're either on or you're off. Like those are the two options. You don't have a choice. We are doing this as an organization. I think the downside is always when you have to do it. I always categorize people as supporters, terrorists, or leaning supporters or leaning terrorists. You do create a bunch. The terrorists are gone at that point, but the leaning terrorist will take a while to win over to a leaning supporter. So any CEO who listens to this afterwards and you're going through that change, and it's not just about CX, it's any change.
It's any change, yeah. Agreed.
One, you have to put an ultimatum sooner or later. And two, just because the decision is made and the train left the station, that doesn't mean you shouldn't do everything you can to get the leaning terrorist going over to the leaning supporter group.
Agreed. And a lot of times you need to move quickly, because what ends up happening is those leaning terrorists will take the place of the terrorists, right? And start to try to pull everybody else their way too. So you really do have to put a time stamp on that and say it's going to be done by X. Otherwise,
Tell me, when do you feel the most fulfilled? Not like, hey, money was paid into my account for all the great things I did, which is always going to be more value than the cost of paying you. Just so every listener understand that. But
Exactly.
when are you fulfilled, Annette? Like, when do you feel like I love what I do?
Pretty much every day, but it's because I see things happening, right? I see change happening. You know, back in my early days, I remember I was like, I got to have my elevator pitch ready. People ask me, what do I do? How do I answer it succinctly? And by the time we get to the third floor, we're done. And I used to say that I work with companies, work with executives to improve whatever it was. It was, whether it was the customer experience or improve the employee experience to help them, just do better as a business, basically. I don't remember the exact thing that it was, right? But I used to say that wasn't the paycheck that made me happy. It was hearing from my clients that we made this change or we did this, or just watching that employees were feeling and starting to feel the work that we were doing, right? There's a client right now where I sit in on all their committee meetings, and we asked in the last committee meeting, after having worked together for a year, how's this feeling right now? Are you starting to feel like this is starting to move? Are you starting to feel the culture shift and some of the things that are being done? And they said yes. And it was just like that. To me, that's satisfying. That's what makes me happy, is that I get to see some of that progress and really go, hey, I've been working with them on that. So yeah.
I love it. Okay, let's move over to a little bit of a lightning round here.
Okay.
And I will ask you a couple of quick questions, 5 of them.
Oh, wow.
And first things that come to your mind,
Okay.
like no filtering, no
Okay.
PR, no prepped answer. What's the most overrated buzzword in leadership?
Accountability.
Tell me more.
I think people use it a lot and they have no idea what it means or how to measure it or capture it or do it. It's just, yeah, I think, and that's the reason I think it's a buzzword. It's like accountability, but don't really know what that means.
It's almost like AI in tech company.
Yeah.
Okay. What's one book you keep coming back to? And it's a business book.
The book is Everybody Matters by Bob Chapman. He's the CEO of Barry Waymiller.
I have not read that. Thank you. Why is it amazing? Why should I read it?
His story is amazing. He had this epiphany. He had this revelation years ago. And I first wrote about it back in 2012 after his TED Talk, where he just said, you know what? I have people coming into my business 8, 10, 12 hours a day. When they leave at the end of the day, I shouldn't send them home feeling worse, treating their spouses differently, being mad at people, or just being in a worse shape than when they arrived this morning, right? I should send them home at the end of the day feeling like they've been cared for and going home and being happy to see their kids and spouses, blah, blah, blah. So really powerful. There's a short that goes, it's like a 35-minute short that's on Amazon Prime that you can watch that goes along with the book. And it's just, and his TED Talk, just really powerful in terms of that epiphany that he had and how he changed his leadership approach after that.
I love you. I love it, not love you, but that's amazing. What's a leadership lesson that you had to learn the hard way, or that you have to learn in the future?
And this comes from Bob. I will say this comes from Bob, and he and I had several phone calls over the course of when I first started my business, 8 years ago. We had several phone calls about all the things that you and I just talked about, right? And it was a particular CEO that I was working with, and I said, I feel like he just doesn't care about his people. And he goes, Annette, you know what? You can't make people care. He will probably never care about his people. And I thought, wow, I mean, that's just a harsh reality, right? It's like, how is that even possible? So yeah, that was a hard lesson to learn. And it was just from somebody who, like I said, who had that epiphany that he's got to, shift his mindset and do things differently. Yeah, he goes, some people will just, you just can't teach them how to care. And some people just never care. So I was like, wow, that's disappointing. That's really disappointing.
It's a reality check.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's the hardest decision you ever made, or the most courageous one?
I'm going out on my own. going out on my own. As you know, living in Orange County,
It's absolutely cheap.
yeah. Oh, it's the cheapest place that you can live in the country. And and having 2 mouths to feed, single mom, 2 mouths to feed and Orange County mortgage, not exactly like, hey, yeah, I'm going to go out on my own and live on the edge. So that was probably, and I had wanted to do it a lot sooner, but it's just a scary thing to do, but I'm so happy that I did it. It's the best decision I ever made.
Next question will be easy for you.
Okay.
What does real employee empowerment look like?
Setting that vision, letting them know that they can do whatever they need to do to achieve the goals or the mission or the purpose or the experience. But here's the vision for what my empowered employees look like, and just letting them run with it and live within all of that, but just giving them the freedom to do what they need to do to live by that.
I love that answer. Annette, we're coming up on the end of the show. I think you're amazing. You made a massive impact for my company early on. It's a culture that lives on, and several of the people that were involved already back then, they're still within the customer experience area.
That's awesome.
But people that listen to you now, where can they find you, and what's the size of the company? What's it like your ideal person to work with, and where are you able to bring massive value every single time to people?
I love the question, my ideal person to work with. Years ago, when I first started my business, I had an analyst from Gartner who I'd been working with at my previous company. And he called me one day and he said, well, who's your ideal customer? And I said, if you have employees or customers, you are my ideal customer, right? Because I'm going to help you set you on the right path. But ideally, somebody from the executive team who gets it, or who wants to make change within the organization, from culture to employee experience to customer experience. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'll always love to meet new people on LinkedIn. And my website is cx-journey.com, and happy to connect with you through there as well.
And anyone listening, I would not do this personal recommendation unless I really believed in someone. Annette was absolutely transformative to Archilles early on, and she was a catalyst that got us a lot of the success years later. And she was someone we actually talked about years after we ended the work we did with her. But anyway, I want to thank everyone for listening. I want to thank you, Annette, for taking the time to come here today. If today's conversation was inspiring for you, please give us a 5-star rating at Apple Podcast. And you can find us under Adapt or Die. Make sure that you follow us on Spotify. And please, please, please remember, especially after this conversation with the amazing Annette, in leadership, we adapt and thrive, or we don't survive. Until next time.
Amen.